So that was the thing, is like, how do you make that new every day? How are you listening every day? And you guys know it's like, it's percentages. Some days are better than other days. You know? Some days you're muddling through on technique. But that's why you have to have technique, because you're not going to be able to cry every night. But when I was in graduate school, I had this professor. He used to say, he was dying actually while he was teaching us. He was teaching us Chekhov and Shakespeare. He was my voice teacher's husband, and he had cancer. And he was like, this is it, so here it comes, not fucking around with you guys. And he would always say to me, dry it up, Carrie. It doesn't matter if you cry. It matters if they cry. And that was a really good lesson. You don't have to feel it to make it be true. I keep doing that. You know, it's not about me, actually. It's not about me. Yeah. And that was the thing that I had to like keep learning every night in that play.
I have to ask first and foremost, because you have such great stage experience,
yes,
are you more comfortable doing something like this where you just get to walk in and say what's top of mind, answer some questions and leave, or more comfortable when you're doing a play, like when you have a role and you can walk on stage and be somebody else?
I suppose I've gotten to the point where I don't care about anything. And so now the danger is that who knows what I'll say. And so now this form is probably more perilous for me. Because on stage I have a very, set of dialogue that I have to say, and it's very unlikely that I'll go rogue. And now that I don't care about anything, who knows what will happen today.
That's right. There's a lot more risk here because
there's a lot of risk.
You can always blame somebody else.
Yeah,
if,
stage is a controlled risk.
Right, absolutely.
And I'm really good at blaming someone else. Whenever I go up on a line, it always looks like the other person's fault. And then they start to think it's their fault just based on my face. I'm very good at that. It's one of my superpowers.
And then if you like that person, you can just point to the director and be like, they told us, like, they just made me do it. I didn't
make
mean
it safe
to, but
for them.
Here we are.
When I was at APT, we used to say, you have to be nice to your fellow actors, because if you're playing dead, which in Shakespeare, of course, you do a lot, they won't get the mosquitoes off of you while you're dead. So you're always nice to everybody. So they'll brush the cape, over you and get all the no-see-ums and mosquitoes off of you.
That would scare me off acting for good.
Well,
I think
it's
if I
not
heard
comfortable.
the potential of mosquitoes just climbing all over me while I was
Especially
on stage.
with all the new diseases we're going to have.
Right, yeah.
See, guys, this could get really dark really fast.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of shows that deal with that darkness, so I think it's a good space to do that. We're mentally prepared for that. Anybody who came here and obviously knows your work. So we're going to start from the beginning, though. We have 90 minutes. We've got
I was
plenty of
born
time.
at Akron Children's Hospital.
This is what I like to hear.
1981.
Perfect. I was going to start, I guess, a hair later than that.
Okay.
What's the first performance you think of as a kid or as a young adult that you actually noticed as a performance? So not something that necessarily it's like, wow, I love that movie blew me away, that TV show is amazing. It's like, I really took note of this as like a piece of acting, like some work.
That's really interesting, because I grew up watching old films. My grandfather's father ran a movie house in Akron, Ohio. And my grandfather, in World War II, they saw theater manager on his little card, and so they put him in charge of a live theater in France. And so he met all these, he met like Mickey Rooney, and he played his trumpet for everybody, and then he came back and he did 2 plays at a community theater. Anyway, I'm telling you that because he was a real cinephile, and so growing up, I think the first experience I had that was really visceral was probably Katharine Hepburn. Because I think there was something about her. She was classy.
Sure.
Her voice was very rooted and very specific, but I never identified as a girly girl. I was, I grew up in a family of 5 kids. I basically wore my brother's clothes until I was 17. So I was in, Ocean Pacific and, the hyper-colored T-shirts and stuff. And I had short hair, and I played sports. And I got kicked out of every ladies' room I ever tried to go into until I was about 17 and a half. And so I think I actually responded, to her androgyny in a way. Like there was something about her that I understood as powerful, that I understood as taking up space. And also I knew, she was always with golf clubs and, she was athletic. And so I think there was something about her that I related to. My grandfather, when I started acting later in my life, he always was like, I think you're more of a Lauren Bacall. He always loved me to be a Lauren Bacall. He thought I should be playing those parts.
Parents and grandparents have those kind of set opinions
do.
where they see something in you like at a specific time, and that just comes through no matter what.
Yeah, it's true.
I love that you call it a movie house, though, not even a movie theater.
I am. Yeah, maybe that's what I relate. A movie house. Maybe I just liked.
It sounds great. I mean,
still
it sounds
just talk like her now.
Exactly. That's beautiful. Well, I think you got into this a little bit, but how else, I guess, besides your grandfather owning a movie house, how else did growing up where you grew up in the Midwest in Ohio, how did that kind of influence you to get into acting? What was that?
It basically did everything it could to dissuade me from doing that, because there's absolutely no example of that anywhere around. Though my grandfather had done plays, I didn't really know what that meant. And I've told this story before, but I had a friend in elementary school, Laura Goomis, and her parents took us to the Akron Civic Theater. And that was one of those atmospheric theaters, so it had the clouds and the stars on the ceiling. It was so magical, and it was so old. And we saw the play Babes in Toyland. And I was 10 years old, and the kids on stage were my age. And I was just like, how come they're allowed to do that? Who are these people? And it had never occurred to me before, because of course nobody had ever taken me to the theater. My parents worked. My dad ran an auto parts store. My mom was an emergency room nurse, and she worked nights, so she slept during the day. So she never drove us anywhere. If we asked her to do something, she would say, "Can you get a ride?" So I wasn't going to be driven to rehearsals at the community theater. And I came to her and I said, "Can I audition for the Weather Vane Community Theater?" And she was like, "No." Because we also babysat. My brothers were 7 and 9 years younger than me, so my sister and I babysat every weekend and sometimes during the week. I think my parents think this is all something I've made up. But no, we absolutely did babysit like every weekend. And my brother did not. And he also got the largest room. And we had to share one downstairs. But that's all sour grapes.
Yeah, you're
I'm very successful.
Not holding on to that. That
not at all. No, none of that. All of that is, I've dealt with all of that. I'm very post-ego. So there weren't any examples. I did see movies. I saw that play, and I knew I was interested. And then it wasn't until my senior year in high school that I did a play for the first time.
So did they have it in the high school? They had plays?
Yes, we had, as most high schools have, a terrible, not funded theater program. And I think we did Sound of Music, and I cannot sing and dance. Those people are actually talented. So I was just a Sister Bertha sing, and I couldn't sing harmony. As soon as everybody else started singing, it was over for me. Same with marching band. I never played my instrument when I marched. I knew the steps, and I would move my fingers, but I wasn't actually playing the trumpet. I didn't like to do things I wasn't very good at, and then you have to practice an instrument, turns out, and I was not interested in practicing. So what was I talking about?
You were talking about the theater program at school. And how
so I was waiting for soccer practice to start, because I'd played soccer for a long time. I loved soccer, and I knew they were doing auditions for the play, so I secretly prepared, and I went in there, and I got the lead of Emily in Our Town in another terrible high school production of Our Town. I think we had a papier-mâché tree with balloon leaves. I mean, really terrible. And I had to go get my own dress at the Goodwill, my own wedding dress. And it was a great, ragtag bunch of kids. That was my first kiss, I think, probably. Well, maybe I'd had a kiss before that. Maybe Aaron Garman and I kissed at band camp. Anyway, all that's to say.
We can get into that too if you want.
Yeah, let's not go back that far. So I was on stage, and the play was terrible, but I knew that speech was a good speech. And I knew that when I was giving it, people were paying attention to me for the first time in my life, because I'm a middle child, and no one was paying attention to me. Or at least that's how it felt.
Sure, of course.
So.
Well, I read, and again, I think this sprang from Wikipedia, but then I found the actual interview, that at the time when you did decide to go after, to pursue acting after high school, into college, into your MFA program, that your parents did support you.
Absolutely.
You had doubts, and your parents did say, no, go after this. What kind of changed for them? Was it seeing you do it?
They were always supportive. My mom just didn't want to drive me anywhere.
Sure.
If I could get a ride, I could have done it. My parents, like a lot of kids from my generation, we had to have a job. Unless I was playing sports. If I was playing sports, I didn't have to work. But I always had a job. I got a job when I was 15. I was not afraid of working hard. But my parents were... They were working class people, but my mom read books voraciously. My dad went to a seminary, and he was a humanist. I mean, he came out of his education. He didn't become a Catholic priest because he believed in some of the more liberal ideas in the Catholic Church, so we were raised in a democratic household. And my father was absolutely supportive of the arts. And my father, who was educated in Latin and Greek, was running our family auto parts store, which wasn't exactly what he set out to do. And I don't think he was very happy doing it. And in fact, I know he wasn't, because he sold that business when I was in graduate school and kind of, sat with that for a while to see what he wanted to be when he grew up. And they always wanted us to be happy. They never dissuaded us from doing something we loved. And they supported every hobby I ever tried. And so I was the one who, I'm a Midwestern gal. Like, I was thinking practically about my life. My first major I ever declared when I went to Mount Union was business and Japanese for about 2 weeks. That lasted about 2 weeks, and then I think I went to education, and then it was philosophy, and then a little bit of poli-sci, and I pretty much just by default ended up as an English lit and Spanish lit major, just because I had enough credits. But I changed majors like 8 times.
You tried everything you could not to get into acting.
Yeah, and I studied abroad. Yeah, I did everything else. And then I did plays on the side, and they were fun, and I was good at it, but I didn't think of it as a career because I didn't know about Juilliard, I didn't know about NYU, I didn't know about any of that stuff. And it wasn't until a professor said, you can audition. So all that's to say, when I finally got into a program, excuse me, I'm very emphatic, I guess, and it was UW-Madison, Wisconsin, an acting program you've never heard of, that no longer exists. And I was the last actor out of a group of 10 that they took. At that time, it was not common to go right from undergrad to graduate school. The economy was good. They expected actors to have experience. They assumed a lot of them were coming to learn to be teachers. And so only 2 of us were coming, right out of undergrad. So, and my parents were like, yeah, go to acting school. Why not? And I was like, really? And they're like, yeah. And so I got in a car and I drove to Wisconsin and I got an apartment. I think I also got a boyfriend that week. I moved fast. And then, and then I just lived in this shitty little apartment in Madison for 3 years, and it was great.
So what was that, like, because it was something that you were hesitant about, what were you kind of expecting when you got there that you would learn, and how did that
I had no earthly idea what I was going to learn, because I had never really studied it. My college acting classes were, as you can imagine, very rudimentary. My college professor, who I love, who was the one who put me on this path, he hadn't really read a play since Heidi Chronicles. All my monologues were from plays from the 70s, because I don't think he'd seen anything in decades. I love him. I just saw him actually a few weeks ago. And so I didn't know what I was going to learn. I was suddenly a TA, so I was teaching acting to kids who were basically my age, who were taking it just to get an easy A, at a Big Ten university. And so I was learning it while I was teaching it. And I think one of the first days I did have an acting exercise that was about learning to be born. And I went home and I Googled the Peace Corps. And I was like, I'm out. I cannot do this. I don't know what I'm doing. This is absurd. I'm out of here. And then it was really the voice work that kept me in, because it was really I had never taken a breath, turns out. I'd never actually taken a deep breath. I don't think anyone in the Midwest ever had, no.
That's still true for some of us.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Everyone's walking around like this, or talking like this, so.
So looking back on it now, was there something about the program that you still hold on to? Obviously the voice or the breath work, a lot of the kind of core rudimentary lessons, but was there something, I guess, that you learned there that you felt like you may not have learned in a different school, even in another MFA program?
I don't know if I wouldn't have learned it in a different school. I probably would have learned a lot more in a different school, but it also might have messed me up. It might have also gotten in my way. I've seen kids who go through programs that kind of do break you down and put you back together, and I feel like I can spot them for about 5 years. I'm like, I know where you went. And in about 7 years, maybe I won't notice. So, that's not to knock anything in particular. I won't say anything out loud in case anybody wants to give me some kind of weird degree later. Some honorary degree from some fancy place. But, I probably knew just enough to still have some of myself intact when I left. And, sometimes when you don't know what you don't know, there's a kind of, you're not scared. When I auditioned for Erica Daniels, who was the Steppenwolf casting director, I had no idea what Steppenwolf was or what actors came out of that program. And so in some ways, I didn't know enough to be afraid. And so I just kept going. It's kind of the same way. I'm like, well, I guess if they let me, I'll just keep going until somebody says, We've seen right through it, and now you're done. But I kind of can't emphasize enough how critical the voice work was, because I don't actually think it's being taught as much anymore. And kids certainly aren't coming up through the theater anymore. I mean, regional theater is struggling as much as any arts program in a country that fundamentally doesn't support the arts in any way. So my first job out of school was an 1,100 seat house that you had to, a big bowl you had to fill at nighttime with nothing to bounce sound off of. And I'm not a big lady. Like, I had to really work to project in that space, let alone do a whole monologue in it. And so that kind of rigor, I don't think we get that training anymore. And it was also things like the International Phonetic Alphabet, which is how you learn a good dialect, those skills. Young actors aren't learning that stuff anymore. I'm like, well, then how are you learning your dialects? I don't know. So that stuff was really important to me. And just being able to have control over my instrument is the source of any choice I can make,
Well, I don't want to put you on the spot because I don't want to cost you any degrees either. But
sure, let's do it.
I do feel like a lot of people, look to the actors they respect, the actors they idolize, and want to know, okay, how do I get there?
Right.
And what do you tell them? Would you encourage someone to get their MFA in acting?
Yeah,
today?
if they're not paying for it.
And how? Well, okay, great.
I would
good.
say don't pay for it.
Okay.
Find another way, because you're going to go into debt and you'll never get out of debt unless you have a trust fund, which most people I knew didn't have. So I think the business has changed so much since I was that age. I mean, I came up before self-taping. Yeah. I used to get those jobs because I got to go in the room. And that's a real disservice not to be able to be in the room. I would never have a career if I wasn't in those rooms. No. And I used to tell actors to remember that going into that room has to be a fundamentally generous act. You have to be going in there with openness and love, which is the opposite of self-consciousness and the opposite of self-absorption. Because nothing generative happens in that place. But of course, that's the first place you want to go when you're feeling insecure. If you're testing for a pilot or you're auditioning for a play or you're one of the 3 people that are going to do a commercial, your inclination is to get really self-conscious, and you can't. And that's the sharing of that. But I don't know how you do that on a tape. I mean, you have to still do it on a tape somehow. And the kids are obviously figuring out how to do it better than me. But I feel like my advice doesn't apply to them anymore because the business has shifted so mightily.
Is there anything you would tell them, I guess, to look for in the program? Assuming they don't, they get a scholarship, Is there anything that they can find out before they get into it? That is a good signal that these people are going to give you what you need. These will help you.
I would say it doesn't matter where you go. You're going to get out of it what you put into it. And some of that program will be successful and some of it will be really bad. And programs are always they're always transforming. So just because somebody went there 10 years ago doesn't mean you're getting the same education. But you can certainly learn if you're applying yourself. I mean, also in an acting program, I think so much of what you learn happens by doing the plays. So no matter what's going on with the instruction, you're going to be doing plays. And that's where you learn how to do it. You don't really learn how to do it in a monologue class. You're not really going to crack Chekhov in a semester of Chekhov class, We had a semester of Beckett. It was absolutely insane. But I don't know what I learned from it. The focus of my program was Asian movement. I haven't really applied that anywhere. And honestly, no one's asking,
You just
not
shot
really
in Thailand.
a good.
I feel like
Yes,
maybe
well,
it
yes,
came back
yes,
around.
as the sort of participating in some exploitative culture.
Right, exactly. Which I think probably came up.
But but what was important? I was in my 20s. I was 26 when I graduated, so kind of a late start. But anytime you can bang around in some bubble at that age where you're not going to do that much damage, it's really about self-knowledge. So I don't care if you're in a literature grad program. It doesn't mean you can't be an actor afterwards. You're still going to be banging around inside of some space where you probably have health care and a gym and food and a place to sleep. And that's we give up that autonomy so quickly when we grow up. That's a time in your life when you can actually do anything. And the most important thing you can do is do that. Travel and read books and meet people in weird places and extend yourself in a way that you won't have space to when you're a responsible adult.
Right. Really quick, I'm stuck on the idea of you as a TA, especially coming in and becoming a TA.
Yeah.
Do you feel like that helped at all? Kind of forcing you to think about what you're telling other
Yes.
people to do
Yes.
also made you think about what you were doing, and then
I think anytime you're forced to articulate, right, some instruction, you have to know it better. And I started off being really bad. And by the end, I think I understood that what I was experiencing with those students is there was no one inviting them to be fully expressed in any room. And often I was also getting athletes who were just there to get like easy A's, right? That's their coaches put them in those classes. And it was really incredible to find that my job was actually just to give them like a hint of some kind of transformation. There were about 3 of them that turned out to be actors, and I'm still in touch actually with a couple of those students. But mostly it was just like give them a place where they feel like they can use themselves, and it's a little scary. Because like most of them weren't talking in class, The classes are too big. No one's asking them any questions anyway. No one's asking for their opinions. No one's asking them actually how they're doing. No one's asking them to pick a piece of language that expresses how they're feeling, maybe, and asks them to sort of inhabit it. And so making them uncomfortable became the only, what I was doing. And I was uncomfortable. What I was learning was uncomfortable for me. So it was good.
it took me at least 2 years into college to realize that the TAs weren't professors.
Yes.
I thought
They have no
the TAs
idea
were
what's
like,
going on, and they're making no money.
Right.
I mean, I was part of a big protest that, by the time I think we were making like $9,000 a year or something. I can live on $9,000 a year, and I'm really proud of that.
in Wisconsin, yeah, it's definitely doable. Or at least it used to be.
Yeah, not anymore.
All right, so moving into the professional roles. You're out of school.
Mm-hmm.
Again, sources tell me that your first professional role was in our town.
Yeah, it was
So
while
you're
I was
coming
still in
back to-
graduate
And it
school.
was at the Madison Theater, right?
Yes.
Madison Repertory.
Madison Repertory Theater.
Do you think of that as your first role? Like, do you think, when you think, this is where I started, is it at that point?
Yeah, I think I do, because it was definitely a professional opportunity, even though I was still in school. Some of my professors were in the play also, so we all got credit for it. But I was definitely the lead in that play, right? In a big, beautiful, they had just remodeled, they'd build the Overture Center in Madison. It was a beautiful theater. Sadly, the Madison Repertory Theater didn't last many years after that. Hopefully not because of me. I did go back and do several more plays. Clearly I didn't help very much. But yes, definitely, and because I was working with Andre DeShields. So he was one of my first famous professional people. Extraordinary. And he came in to be our stage manager, and the thing I learned from him, I learned 2 things from him. The first thing was, I now wear, I wore it today, I have a jumpsuit that I wear to work every single day. I've been wearing the same jumpsuit for about 7 years. It's a good one, it's a Rachel Comey. But it's like he wore a very tailored, almost like mechanics jumpsuit, but gorgeous, because that was his rehearsal uniform. And then he didn't have to think about what to wear. And there was nothing signifying in what he was wearing. I keep doing that, sorry.
Sorry, me too.
And so I thought, oh, this is such a good idea. So now I have my jumpsuit I wear. And then the second thing he taught me was other people's blessings. If an opportunity comes your way and you didn't get it, it was not yours. So do not spend time thinking about the other person who got it, or feeling bad about it, or wishing them ill will, because it was theirs. It didn't belong to you. The one that's coming your way, you don't even know what it is yet. So why are you wasting time thinking about that? And so to think in a way that is, he was like, generosity is the way. Because everything else, again, it's like being in those rooms. It's small-mindedness is not generative. It's not, there's nothing that comes out of it.
I feel like that's such great advice and so important for actors, anybody who's continuously going after
Rejected,
something new
yes.
and rejected. But it's got to be harder to adopt than to say, obviously. Giving
Yes,
the advice is a lot
it is
simpler
hard.
than ingraining it. Was it because it was coming from him? Was it because you started to understand it, or the way he said it? How did you kind of adopt it into something that you could rely on, as opposed to just I know this is true, but I'm still really pissed
Right.
about this and this and this.
I think I understood, again, sort of where creativity comes from.
Okay.
Right? That's not where creativity comes from. And that's not the way being creative makes me feel. Right? If you're doing it, it feels good. It's freedom. It's openness. But I think you're onto something there, and that because I was not one of those kids who knew when I was 6 that I wanted to be an actor, I also didn't have sort of a clear picture about what that dream looked like, because it had never been my dream. And so I was just moving through, open to the experience. And I didn't know what the opportunities were supposed to be And so I was like, oh, well, that looks good. Let's do that, you know? When the American Players, they were like, would you want to come be an apprentice this summer? It's like, yes, of course. Why not? You know, and luckily things like that kept unfolding for me. And I know that's not the way it normally goes. I don't think my path is typical, but I didn't have that rigorous notion about what a life in the arts looked like because I hadn't really considered it. And I always was not sure I was actually doing it. I was like, is this it? Am I doing it now? You know? So I think there was something naive in me that was able to embrace that in a way.
Sometimes youth is just
yeah,
it
it's
necessitates
blissful.
that and helps
Yeah,
with, you know,
it is wasted on the young.
process
Yes.
as well. So I guess to go along with that, just
Mm-hmm.
really quickly, because again, Midwestern, being raised that way, you
Yeah.
had the worries about being like a
Yeah.
practical existence
Yes.
in the arts. Were you afraid, like, during that time? Like, because that stuff
Mm-hmm.
kept happening for you, like, you kept getting jobs and you kept wondering, like, am I doing it? Am I in the arts? Did you still have that fear in the back of your head, like, the next thing might not come, what am I going to do?
No,
What happens next?
I really didn't.
Oh, that's good.
I just thought, oh, okay, well, I'll save this money, save this money. And I had my money market savings account, and I made chili on Sundays and froze it, and I drank water. I didn't go out. I didn't drink alcohol. I wasn't really going out to dinner. Maybe I didn't have that many friends, but that's like a whole other conversation we don't have time for today.
You said you had a
That's a
boyfriend
different
within the
office.
first week of getting into college. I think you're okay.
Yeah,
Social
well,
life
I was,
seems okay.
Like many women, I was kind of a serial overlapper, but it wasn't really about them. And I kind of found out later that it was really quite self-absorbed. But that's again a whole other retrospective.
That's part of the actor's journey as well.
I learned a lot in those years.
Well, you mentioned earlier that, and this I guess goes along with the naivete aspect, but you mentioned that you didn't know anything about Steppenwolf when you went over to Steppenwolf.
No.
So what was the experience like walking into that? Like, did you get a sense that the people around you kind of were holding in a different regard than you were? Did you know that did you feel like you should know something about like this legendary theater and the people who were there? Or like, did it you just entered, did the job and...
You mean when I finally got a job there?
Yeah.
I think I knew. By then I knew. When I was working in Wisconsin, what we did, we had a project. The interns we would bring casting directors and agents to APT, and we would perform for them to try. And I got an agent in Chicago through that program, and so they started sending me out on auditions. And very quickly in the community, you understand where the theaters are that are paying a living wage. That's what you understand. So I was like, if I can work at the Goodman, if I can work at Steppenwolf, if I can work at Northlight, then I'll make a paycheck I can live on. The other theaters, it's going to be a little harder to cobble it together. I was still doing a little bit of like industrial voiceover work in Madison that I picked up. I was doing some motion capture work for video games, so I would go back to Madison and do a couple of rounds of that stuff. And I was like editing dissertations for ESL students. That was the other thing. So I was always trying to stay in language. I'm a terrible waitress. So I knew that I was targeting those places. And you also know in Chicago what the plays are going to be about a year in advance because they cast so early. So you also know if you don't get a job in that season, it's going to be another year before that stuff comes around to cast again. So I was always very savvy about knowing, and I knew that Honey was coming up in that season. And I was like, I'm right for this part. So, so by then, yes, I understood that those jobs were really coveted jobs, and they were hard to get. And I had auditioned many, many times for Steppenwolf and gotten called back a lot, but never gotten the role. And so Steppenwolf was the first time I'd gotten it. And I guess the thing I understood, maybe intuitively, I don't know why I understood it, was that you have to walk in a room like that like you belong in that room. And not everybody does that, and then it gets in your way. Gets in your way, because again, it's always insecurity. And the root of insecurity is always fear of something. Failure, right? Making a mistake. And I, like many young women, was a very good student, and I always was trying to guess what somebody wanted, so they would say yes to me. And I remember, I've said this before too in interviews, I'm sure, but I had a director at APT, and I was, trying to figure out what he was asking for. And at one point he just said, I don't want to work with Carrie the student. I want to work with Carrie the artist. And that was really, I heard that. I really heard that. And so when I walked into Steppenwolf to do Virginia Woolf, I understood that I had been chosen, and that there were 6 other women who'd been called back and they did not get that job, and any one of them could do that job. And the best way to dignify myself and all of those other women was to be really good at it, so that they would come and see it and be like, actually, yes, that was yours. I couldn't have done what you did. And that's the way to dignify those people, is like to be just like undeniably the best at that job.
So that lesson of walking in like you belong, that was something that you learned after the fact, basically, like after you'd gotten the job.
I guess
that
it was
kind
in
of pulled you
reflecting
through
upon it.
Yeah.
I understood that was a strength I'd had going in. I mean, I was an athlete. I understood what confidence gives you. I knew how to enter a room, right? I guess there were some things I understood about that were intuitive. But yes, in retrospect, because then, then fast forward, you're working with David Fincher. The same principle applies. Yeah. You can't walk in there on day one like you're going to get fired, even if it's highly probable that you will be.
Again,
Could be really intimidated.
A great lesson to learn as early as humanly
possible.
possible.
Learn it at Steppenwolf so that when you walk into Garden Girl, you're not
always as simple.
Crying.
Okay, so kind of going along with that discovery phase, I guess. So Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf? It went from Steppenwolf to Washington, D.C. to New York on Broadway.
Yes.
I know at least one member of the audience here who was lucky enough to see this. Was there anybody
two of
else?
You. Three of you.
A bunch of
Four
people.
of you?
Yes, that's what. All right, great. I'm incredibly, eternally jealous. But for you as an actor, how did that affect you? Like the traveling aspect of the play, the fact that it was a season in Chicago, and then you found out that you were going to continue going on to these other places. Like did that? Did your perception change of like what you were doing and where you were? Like, did the audiences affect you at all? Like, kind of how did that movement?
Well, Ben, I'm afraid I can't talk about this without talking about the fact that the other thing that was going on in my life is that I had met the person I was going to marry. Sure. And so much of what was happening during that time was the psychodrama of like seeing where my life was and then the steps I had to take to actually walk into it. Looking around and realizing that I wasn't actually living my life. And then, therefore, nor was the person who I was dating, right? And then to see that Tracy was over there and neither was the person he was dating. We had a lot to figure out. So much of that time is really colored by the final drama of my 20s. As I turned 30, the year I met Tracy. So I met Tracy in November in rehearsal on my grandmother's birthday. And then I turned 30 that January. So the Steppenwolf run was like November, December, January. And then we had like a little, maybe we did go right to arena stage just after a few weeks. And the arena stage was kind of the last place where Broadway producers were going to be able to come see the play. So it was kind of our last hope. And I think Jeffrey Richards came the last weekend. So we didn't know it was going to Broadway. And then, this was the weird part about that process. So like, Steppenwolf production was pretty solid, right? We got better in DC. And then we didn't do the play again for 18 months. The Broadway run was actually 18 months later. So we would get together periodically and run the lines just so we wouldn't lose the play. But I did the real thing. I mean, I then went back and did my Chicago storefront stuff. Like I did a couple of plays in Chicago in that 18 months before we went to Virginia Woolf. And what happens when you get to step away from a piece and then come back to it is that inevitably it somehow is it's sunk down a little deeper. And there's just something about it that's like just more a part of you, and it's easier. And you realize how effortful you were being in the first iteration, and you start to think, oh, was I doing it like that? That's so bad. We were looking back at Chicago and just thinking just how terrible we were. We were so terrible. But then you're also being invited into, this is like, it's Broadway, That's the place everyone's trying to get to. You could argue whether the best work is done there, but that's not the point. The point is, that's where you're supposed to try to want to be, even though the dressing rooms are really shitty and, and I wasn't being paid very much. But that's the place. And so we'd been doing the play so long by then. So then the job is, you've been doing it now so long, how do you make it new every night? Yeah. And when you're working with people like Tracy Letts and Amy Morton, who have literally played married at that point like 8 times, I think, and have been working together for almost 30 years, they know how to do that. And so I had the great privilege of watching them like really kind of dig in new every night. I mean, when Amy Morton teaches at Steppenwolf, and she teaches that Meisner technique, which is all about kind of that present moment, her thing is like kill, fuck, or fly. In a moment, nobody should be able to know. Like, are you going to kill, fuck, or fly next? That's really exciting. The most exciting actors we watch are the ones where you don't know what's going to happen next, Even if they're nuts and you're like, this is kind of too big, but I'm sort of into it. Because you're like, they might murder me, And so I watched them do that every night for 2 years. And they're really, really good. They're really good at their jobs. And Madison Dirks he's one of the best listeners. And the fact that kid hasn't worked really a day since then is a crime because he's a great actor. And everybody thought he was that guy, but he's like the total opposite of that guy. Anyway, it's the curse of that part, but that's a whole other conversation. So that was the thing, is like, how do you make that new every day? How are you listening every day? And you guys know it's percentages. Some days are better than other days. Some days you're muddling through on technique, but that's why you have to have technique, because you're not going to be able to cry every night. But when I was in graduate school, I had this professor. He used to say, he was dying actually while he was teaching us. He was teaching us Chekhov and Shakespeare. He was my voice teacher's husband, and he had cancer. And he was like, this is it, so here it comes, not fucking around with you guys. And he would always say to me, dry it up, Carrie. It doesn't matter if you cry. It matters if they cry. And that was a really good lesson. You don't have to feel it to make it be true. I keep doing that. It's not about me, actually. It's not about me. Yeah. And that was the thing that I had to keep learning every night in that play. To do it that long was really hard to do. 3.5 hours. That's a lot of pad thai. We had a lot of pad thai on Saturdays. That restaurant closed at a very bad health rating. It's still the best pad thai I ever had. And I was in Thailand for 6 months this year.
Well, as this is happening, obviously, at the end or at some point in the middle, you won a Theater World Award.
Yeah.
You were nominated for a Tony.
Yeah.
Did it feel like something was shifting for you personally?
Yeah.
So as you're putting all this into the character and reminding yourself that this isn't about me, it's about the work, it's about them, something was happening to you.
Yes.
So how did you balance those things, and what was that like?
Well, of course, any actor knows that you're only as good as the opportunities you get. So what the Tony nomination gave me, sorry, Judith Light, what the Tony nomination gave me was just the doors were opening. So I suddenly was meeting casting directors in TV and film. At that point, I had done commercials, mostly for Walmart, and maybe you remember a high fructose corn syrup commercial that was part of a lawsuit where I say, sugar is sugar, your body can't tell the difference. Anyway, that's still out there somewhere. I really needed that job though, you guys.
Sugar
and also, my car broke down on the way, so I think all things being equal, the universe punished me enough. Okay, so I hadn't had that much on-camera experience. I had done the guest star spot on Playboy Club was the longest I'd ever been on camera. But that June was the Tony Awards, and then July I booked the pilot of The Leftovers because Ellen Lewis came to the play, because casting directors go to plays and see actors, and so that's what the old system was like, and then they champion those actors. Meeting with Damon, so I booked the pilot, and then it was I think a month later, I was back in Chicago, so it was after Tony Awards, moved back home, Tracy and I were gonna get married, all that was falling into place. And I made a tape for Gone Girl in the living room there. And so I booked The Leftovers and Gone Girl. And so I shot the pilot, which of course is one scene. So that wasn't a lot of on-camera experience. And then I immediately went to Cape Girardeau, Missouri, and went to Fincher School. And I shot all of Gone Girl. And then I went back and shot episodes 2 through, how many is it? 10? 8?
10, 10, and 8. So.
Okay, thank you. You know it so much better than I do.
Well.
I haven't seen it since it aired. So then I went and shot the rest of the episodes of. So I felt like I was so much better by then because I had done Gone Girl with David. I learned so much about being on camera. I mean, I didn't know anything about being on camera.
But really. That's also such a unique. I mean, again, I haven't been on camera with David Fincher, obviously, but everything you read about his repetition, his obsessiveness, his need for
which
kind
I
of
really
specificity
needed.
and control. Okay, so other people, other actors have said that this is
they don't like
a
it.
burden. This is something that can really, wear on them in a way that they're not used to.
Yeah.
I'm always curious if it's different depending on either your background, if you've done theater, let's say, before, or your training, what you're kind of used to and prepared for.
Right.
But for you, what was it about that direction, that Fincher School, that was so essential?
Well, certainly doing a play for 2 years straight is good practice for that.
Yeah, I would think so.
Again, it's you understand repetition. I think theater actors, again, that's the whole thing. You're doing the same thing and making it new. What David is trying to achieve, he hates mannered performances. Yeah. He believes in punctuation. He does not, if you have a period, you end your sentence. He does not upspeak. Because you should finish your thought, because you don't know if you're going to say another thought. So it feels like rigor, but what he's actually forcing is spontaneity. There was a take when I'm answering the phone one time when Ben calls, and I fumbled the phone the longest fumble, and I was and I finally caught it, and then I was and then I lost, and he was like, no! He was like, that was it. That's the one. And I had, and I broke, so I didn't pursue it. He loves a mistake.
And that's so fascinating to hear, just because what kind
You
of
think
settles
it's about
in, right? It's
exactitude,
like, no,
but
I have
it's
this
not.
exact thing in my mind that I want, and you're not
He's
getting
like, that's
it.
the real thing. What you just did there when you made a mistake was real. Everything else has been horseshit. And so he sees that bullshit and he doesn't like it. Now it's also true that sometimes rhythmically there's an expectation. There is also technical direction, absolutely, from David. It's both things, but he is trying to achieve a presence in that. And he doesn't remember this story. He pretends like the story doesn't exist. I got in trouble. My first day. So he does all exteriors for the first couple weeks so that you're just getting into the rhythm of the thing and you're not speaking, which is, for me, that was great. I was really scared to open my mouth. It's just like me getting in and out of cars. The first day I actually had a scene. We were down in Cape Girardeau. We were in a bar. And he was like, I need you to, look up, put down the magazine. Say, it was like a very specific sequence that he wanted because of his shot. And he kept saying, I'm not getting enough screen direction. I'm not getting enough screen direction to everybody, to me, to the DP. And I was like, I don't know what that is. I don't know what screen direction is. And whatever it was he was asking me to do had to do with like the angle of my face or something. And he eventually was like, you can't do it. And then moved on. And I was like, oh no, this is it. This is it. They're going to have to do reshoots. It's going to be terrible. And Ben puts his hand on my back in the trailer and they're all like, it's going to be all right. It's fine. So the next day I was like, look. I was like, David, I said, you knew when you hired me for this movie that I had never made a movie before. So there are things you are asking, and I don't know what they are. But if you explain them to me, I will, and I can do it. And he was like, okay, come here. Look at this shot. This is really tight. This is the something lens. I still don't know. And he's like, this is why I need you to glide out of frame on your right foot. You cannot move. I was like, okay, got it. And then from then on, that's what he did. He would show me the shot. He would tell me what he needed. He would explain to me what the principle was behind it. And Ben, too. Ben was geeking out over working with David. He was so happy to be with David, and he was always behind it. We're like, Ben, it's a scene. Get away from the camera. We're doing a scene now, Ben. It was so sweet. He was just so smitten with David. And so I just, and also everybody, they were all such seasoned professionals. Lisa Baines, R.I.P. Lisa Baines. I know she was killed in this city. And Kim Dickens, who is still she's just one of the best people I've ever known. Patrick Fugit, so special. I was surrounded by the most special people. And they were so happy for me in the Andre de Shields way. They were so happy. They saw this young actor getting this amazing opportunity. And they were as moved and amazed by it as I was. And that was really, it was really special. We had a really special time.
So how does that, especially as your introduction, how does that compare to going into TV, where everything you hear about TV is speed? Like they have to.
Well, it was very
move.
humbling because yes, you're right. I showed up on the set of Leftovers, and on take number 3, I'm like, okay, it's starting to feel good. And they're like, all right, moving on, we got that. And I was like, what do you mean? I was like, I was just getting warmed up. We did a 77 takes on average. And they were like, no, nope, we don't have time for that. And I was like, oh, okay, I got to get my shit together. So I realized, yes, how quickly it moves, and it's a totally different medium.
Yeah. So
but I also didn't know what I didn't know still.
Well, were you still able to try to talk to kind of the directors and look at the shots, or like how did you kind of approach it?
I didn't do any of that.
Yeah.
I'm also a playwright's wife.
Yeah.
I almost never second-guessed anybody, if it was the writer especially. I came to find out later, after many, many years, that Damon Lindelof was getting like pages of emails from actors. And he's like, I just give you a script and then you do it.
Yeah.
And I was like, I thought that was the gig. I'm just glad to get one, I'd love it a few more days in advance, but I'll take what I can get. So I had no idea that actors even did that. Yeah. I didn't ever take control of it that way.
Well, also, I imagine it had to be a little bit difficult, or maybe not difficult, but a new challenge in the sense that with plays, you have the whole play.
Yeah.
With movies, you have at least your entire arc of the movie, if not, but usually the whole movie. So you can kind of build that.
Yes.
You can work the character, toward from the beginning toward the end. With a TV show, especially something like The Leftovers, which goes in all these different directions, and all you're getting are episodes at a time or pages at a time. How did that affect you in terms of preparation and feeling comfortable with what you were doing in the performance? Like, is it just letting go and putting your trust in the director and the writer and the page, like you mentioned, or is it something else?
Yeah, I didn't know that it was done any other way. Then I did Fargo, and I had 8 really solidly written episodes that never changed before I started my job. And I was like, oh, they're not all the same, turns out, these guys. And both of them very satisfying, you know? There was something really exhilarating about getting a script and then shooting it the next day and realizing, like, getting episode 6 and being like, okay, well, I guess I'll be in every shot for this episode for the first time in my life, you know? And thank God it was Carl directing it. So I was still, again, the naivete. I just kept showing up and doing what everybody told me to do without thinking about it too hard. And then you come to find out later that, actually having all the episodes up front was very helpful in building a character. But it had never occurred to me. Maybe I wasn't I always say, like, I didn't really have a process. Like, I wasn't really building a character. I was just doing what they put in front of me. But they were also, I remember saying, so a gun in my purse, that's so interesting, you guys. What's happening? They're like, we don't know. I was like, okay, okay. Well, I guess we'll see. You know, it was as surprising to them what was happening as it was to me.
It's been a recurring thing when I talk to actors over the years, especially actors who their experience is rooted in theater or movies and they come over to television, that in particular, the not knowing.
Yeah. Well, you know what it is for me, Ben?
Problem, so.
It's the telling stories out of order.
Yeah.
That's the thing. Because you learn a lot when you tell a story in order, obviously. And when you're in play practice, that's how you're building it. You're going through it, and this informs this, obviously. Duh. It's very logical. We don't shoot anything in order.
Yeah.
TV, now we don't even shoot one episode at a time. I might do 3 episodes with 2 different directors on the set of The Gilded Age now. And I'm just like, well, I'm sorry, what episode is this? Okay, great. You know, I hate to be that person, but like, I can't keep track of it. I've got 2 kids. So that is the thing that really gets me. And one of the pleasures this year was when I know we'll probably get to his 3 daughters later, but we shot his 3 daughters in order. Right. And that was very instructive and so deeply satisfying for all of us.
Yeah.
So that's what I miss. And when I go back to theater, you just so value it. Just being able to live the story in order every day. And when you have the climax, it's because you've led up to it. And when you have the denouement, it's because you've already done it. Now it's like your body, you know, the rhythm of your body. There is no rhythm like that in TV.
Well, not to spend too much time on the leftovers, even though I could obviously have done
You're
the whole
obsessed with
90
it?
minutes.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask, I went back and looked at some of our early interviews about the show, and one of the things you flagged about your character, Nora Durst, was that you really liked her sense of humor.
Yeah.
And you saw her sense of humor in the book, but you still saw it in the scripts. And that's something that almost nobody says about the first season of The
they're
Leftovers.
like humorless, yes.
Yeah, it's a very
that's funny.
difficult, challenging show. So I just wanted to ask, like, do you remember kind of any moments in particular that stood out for you where you were like, this is funny, this is the Nora that I was excited to play. This is the Nora that, I mean, for me, obviously, the fuck your daughter line is going to be a classic
that's
forever.
like the memeable line.
That's a little bit later on. But there was always kind of this kind of comical impatience that Nora had because she wasn't taking any bullshit from anybody.
Right.
Like, she was doing her own thing. But I was just curious from your perspective if that still kind of stands out to you about the character. If that was still kind of an important thing.
Yes, absolutely. But I think that's important for any character. Because I don't know any situation in life that we go through without some sense of humor, though it has been tested recently. You know, when my grandma was dying in hospice, I don't think we've ever laughed harder. They always thought she was dead. They'd always come in like, oh, they're keening. We're like, no. No, we just hid a bunch of booze in the bushes and now we're, tossing creamer into her mouth. It was just like horrible stuff, but we were always laughing so hard. So I guess all that's to say, the other advice I used to give, especially young women, always young women, there's never humor on the page. And you're going to be in this sea of tapes. And I was like, my God, honey, if you can find one thing that's just a little bit of humor, whatever it is, if it's in the language, if it's not in the language, if it's in the physicality, your tape will stand out because we are not expected to be funny. And sometimes people argue we're not. I'm getting that a lot, and I disagree.
Yeah.
I disagree. So I think that's really important to find the humor and stuff. And I don't, Tracy's plays are very funny. His last play was about fascism, and it's really funny. And he always says, if people are laughing, then they're listening. And because of my own human experience, I do not trust humorless stuff. And Tom Perrotta's novel's not humorless. So season one, though, Damon admits later he was going through some things and maybe he was not inclined that way. But we certainly recovered in 2 and 3.
Yeah, I would imagine you would have been thrilled at where 2 and 3 went in terms of the humor. There was
Hilarious.
a lot more
So
opportunity to
weird.
really revel in it.
Yes, and also, the breadth of experience that it asked for physically. I've never, ever had a part since that asks that much of me. That spectrum of emotion, physical life, anger, destruction, just out and out weird stuff. It's great. It's so delightful. It's what we want.
Another quote that I found from one of your interviews was that you said, "I like my art to be something that's active in the world, not something that's disposable." And
That's
honestly,
too bad.
I mean,
Yeah.
my interpretation, at least, of this quote is it speaks to so much of what you've done over the course of your career and so much of what I admire about the choices you've made in your career. But just sticking with The Leftovers one last time, does it still feel active to you in that way? Like, does it feel like it's part of the conversation?
More than
with
ever.
People? Okay.
More than anything I've ever made. How many people watched it during the pandemic that had never seen it before?
That's true.
Because what other piece of art spoke to a percentage of the population disappearing and the whole world grieving at the same time? Well, Tom Perrotta's book did, And so I find more people finding their way to The Leftovers now than ever watched it. Nobody watched it when it was on. You know this.
Yeah.
Literally nobody watched it. They really wanted to cancel us, but the critics, like you, kept writing about it, so they kept us on the air for a couple more years, but they didn't really want to. And so I don't think there's anything more relevant than that I've made, which is a really high bar than everything. I mean, I loved that season of Fargo. I think Noah has a particular gift for entering what's happening in the world obliquely to give you some distance to consider some of those moral quandaries or moral architecture or something. He's very good at that. And he only makes a season when he feels like he has something to say, which I also respect. It's not just a machine he's churning out. He does it because he has an idea. So I think he's excellent at that. And I think that's also I've done some really great stuff, You can't always use that calculus, unfortunately, because I think so much of television is very disposable by design. It's made quickly. We're not given it's supposed to look good, but we're not given any time to really settle into it.
Yeah, and I mean, sometimes that's what people need. Sometimes people need
I
the
call
release.
it palliative care in a dying
that's-
world.
That's good.
That's what I'm offering now, which is its own service. So it is active in a way.
Yeah, there's always something to it.
Yeah.
I did want to ask about Fargo because obviously that was right after The Leftovers.
Yeah.
Your first Emmy nomination. I
Yes.
believe?
Yeah.
And Gloria Bergel, first of all, fantastic name. All the Fargo names are great.
They are.
She has a lot of the traits we've talked about, as well as a lot of traits kind of randomly that Nora did as well. Like she obviously, like Fargo has a strong sense of humor. It's a very funny show that's also very dark and serious. But Nora and Gloria both had issues with machines.
Yeah,
and
I do
both
too.
of the series, the season of Fargo, but your series of it ends with this big ambiguous question, which Leftovers does as well. But looking back, they both struck me as two people who were trying to maintain control in a world that's really gone off its rocker. Like for them and in a broader sense, like things have become very, very difficult, which feels obviously very relevant today.
A little bit.
This may always just be the case. There's always going to be people who can connect with these kind of characters in these kind of situations. But I was curious if that's also something that you meant when you talked about parts and roles and work that's active in the world, that you want it to be something that kind of can be relevant to the audience no matter the context, even if it does seem like the context is obvious. In the case of like Fargo, when it ended, things were happening. Fargo today, things are happening. But for you, is it something that like you look for in those parts and those roles?
I do think I'm probably drawn to work that's at least asking a question. I guess that's active. And I think when I reflect back on that quote, and when I think about how I make decisions about what I'm going to do, I try to avoid something that's just commerce. If it's just commerce, that's something else. I think I want to make art. I don't want to make commerce. Now there's a lot of overlap in that realm, and sometimes you have to make commerce to be able to make art. I mean, it's the Cassavetes, right? One for them and one for me. That's just reality. To build a career, you sometimes have to say yes to things so that you can do the things you want to do. We all know that calculus is in there. But I hope to try and do things that are speaking to some question or problem. And I'm just, naturally drawn to more existential things. I always have been. I used to wake up during Johnny Carson and ask my parents when Jesus was coming back. I was like, everyone's talking about it. And they're like, not in your lifetime. I'm like, you don't know that? How do you know that?
Yeah.
Like, you don't know. The whole point is that we don't know. But they, so nobody was very reassuring. So I've always wrestled with those questions. I come by that very honestly.
Understandable. Again,
Recovering
a Midwesterner
Catholic.
raised in Catholic school.
Mm-hmm.
I have similar queries. Okay, so at this point in your career, to me, in part because The Leftovers is so prominent in my life, it really seemed like you'd, again, kind of crossed into this other threshold, like your career had gone on to the next level, so to speak. But are you at a point where you can kind of choose, or you can be more choosy?
I was at a point where I was finally, like Fargo was an offer. That was the first time somebody just come and offered me a part. That I was like, oh, I didn't even know this was happening. That was really exciting. Likewise then, The Sinner was an offer. So I was in my life now where I was getting offers, but I was getting offers for TV. Film, those borders have become more permeable, obviously, over time. All the movie stars have figured out that TV is where the really fun work is happening, and there are more than 5 jobs. So I think I was still fighting to do film work. And nothing, after the months after Gone Girl came out, that nothing happened film-wise for me. Even though there was a lot of talk about the film and how the film would do in awards, blah, blah, blah. It didn't really manifest. It rarely does the way people expect. You can't control how something is received. So it wasn't something I was preoccupied with, but I was aware that it's not like I suddenly got another film. It's like, where are all the films? They're like, there aren't any, And what you come to understand is the structure of the business is such that there's an A-list, and they will do the 8 roles for women that come out in a year. They'll split them up and do them all. And then there's some supporting parts that, will go to a B-list. Top of the B-list, and that I was not there, and I was going to have to work really hard to build a film career, and that nobody was going to be offering me like a leading role anytime soon. And so I had to use TV to kind of build that reputation, and then I'm still fighting for film roles. I mean, I'm auditioning for film roles all the time. Filmmakers I really love, of course I audition for them. So it's not like that's an easy thing. And the business is, it's the Wild West right now.
Right, yeah. The business itself keeps changing where those parts are narrowing, just for those reasons as opposed to...
Yeah, and last year was the fewest number of roles for women in a decade. Yeah, and everyone's like, but we had Barbie and Tar. It's like, yep, that's just because doesn't mean there were a lot of them.
It's so fun what they choose to, ignore and what they choose to take seriously.
To tout.
Yeah, great.
So...
well, I did want to ask about 2 of the bigger franchises that you got to be a part of. You were in The Avengers.
Yeah,
you had an even
bigger
part in 2 Ghostbusters films now.
I did. Yep.
What was that like? Like, just again, from going all the way back to being this little Midwestern girl running around in the farmland where your grandpa had a movie house, to being on these like larger than life productions where again, I feel like the commerce side of it has to feel pretty heavy on those as opposed to some of the other things you've done. But how do you prepare for it? What do you do? What did you learn from being there that you can replicate in the future?
Yes. The Marvel question came up first. Those entry-level Marvel jobs are a promise. They're a promise to maybe do more work later. So there are some misconceptions about what those roles are offering, if you catch my drift. And so that particular part, I was very grateful to be there. The filmmakers obviously were fans of Fargo, and they were really lovely to me. But it wasn't the kind of work I was accustomed to doing. Yes, you're in a motion capture suit, which I had done that work before. But I was on set for about 6 hours. It was actually, there was an eclipse that day, so everybody went outside to watch the eclipse, and so we kind of had to rush through the work. I was also pregnant, so I was peeing every 20 minutes, having to you have to like redo the suit every time you take it off. Anyway. And so I was in a conference room with no other actor, with a producer there reading. I said, can someone read the other lines to me? you know? So I was like, oh, this doesn't feel like what I've been preparing for. And so that was a really quick job. And so I had they did show me what the character would look like, but I didn't have anybody in the room to really, and it was unsatisfying, and I didn't feel like I did a good job, which is not a good feeling, you know? And yet, I signed more autographs for that movie than all of my other work combined. So what's remarkable about that movie is the fandom. The fandom is loving and large, and it's an extraordinary thing to be swept up in. It's not something that was happening to me. You know, it happens on the internet. It happens when I dress up and come to one of these events. Then they know where I am and I sign autographs. But like, nobody recognizes me on the street. So, so in some ways, that phenomenon exists way outside of me and only comes into my life when I'm in a setting where it's really obvious that I'm going to be somewhere where those people can get me. But the work itself was unsatisfying for me. And I don't know. If I was going to come back and do something like that again, I would want to be with other actors in the room because that's what I think of as the work. Ghostbusters, you know, when Jason Reitman called me and said, I have a script for you to read. You need to come to the office and read it. And we had never met before. But he had called a few directors to ask them if I was funny, which I thought was really hilarious.
Hey.
And they had said yes. They're like, she's the best kind of funny. Just not, you know, on screen. You never see it on screen because they never give her those roles.
You
but,
see it sometimes. It comes
I
out.
try. So when I went and sat down and read it, and it was the Ghostbusters franchise. I mean, I grew up with it on television all the time. You know, I was born in 1981. So like the 1 and 2 were just on TV all the time, and we watched TV all the time because that's what you did in the 80s when your parents worked. And so so that was thrilling. And the first one really felt like an independent film. We were up in Calgary. That's kind of Jason Reitman's world, and so it felt really intimate and small. And it felt like one of those Amblin 80s movies. I think it was really successful at that. And the idea of passing it on to a girl who's a scientist, and maybe a little bit on some ASD spectrum, which I think is a good thing to engage with, to a hero that's science. I believe in science, and so that felt really lovely. And then to have Harold Ramis's family be on board for that ending and get to participate in something like that, which felt, I think when the guys were on set, you really felt that absence so acutely, and so it's really mind-blowing to be a part of that kind of moment in cinematic history where I was in the room with them reckoning with their loss in that moment. Is like, I would never have expected to be in that position. I mean, no one expected them to make another movie probably, but and then to get to know Paul. Paul and I are both just like, he's a dad and I'm a mom, and we've got kids, and we're doing that thing all the time, and he just happens to be, like one of the most recognizable movie stars in the whole world. And my family is still wrestling with the idea that I'm the person who are acting opposite these people. It still feels, I think, really inexplicable to all the people who know me, grew up with me, It feels really weird to them that I'm that person in those, that they're watching. And Ghostbusters is the thing that I think more than anything else that has brought out like the hometown kind of people, right? People I've gone to school with, they're like, I took my kids to see, and there you were. Because they haven't watched The Leftovers,
Sure.
So that's more niche.
They'll find it eventually.
Maybe,
It's a later thing.
If you know what's good for you.
Absolutely. Well, speaking of HBO, we have to turn some attention toward The Gilded Age because
it's still happening.
It's still happening.
Yeah, I'm going to Newport on Sunday.
I was just going to ask. I assume season 3 is getting ready to get going, so
it's underway.
that's
We're almost
exciting.
done. Well, we'll be done in January.
Oh,
so
okay,
we've been
great.
shooting for several months. I mean, I came back from Thailand and I was on the Gilded Age set in 48 hours. So that was disconcerting.
Yeah, that's an incredible
I
pivot.
really had to come up against some things there. I was like, wow, I'm really terrible at everything I'm doing.
Well, we know that's not true, but
We'll see.
Going back to the start of it, like when because this was a project that I believe started at NBC, like Julian Fellows had, and like he was following up his PBS original that had done so well, and it was going to NBC, and then it got kind of moved over to HBO.
Yep.
And there were lots of talks about the development and the scripts. What was it to you about Bertha from the beginning that really made you latch on? That really made you be like, this is a character I can chew into a little bit.
Well, the first thing was that Morgan was doing it, and that we would be partnered because Morgan and I had done Great Choice, an avant-garde film, and had a great and wild time doing this weird, funny movie where we're stuck in a Red Lobster commercial from the 90s that we recreated kind of completely. It's really weird and great. So I'd had such a good time with Morgan. So the fact that he was going to play my husband was very enticing to me.
I didn't realize he was cast first. That's
It was Morgan and Cynthia and Christine, and they had been gearing up to shoot before the pandemic. And then Amanda Peet left the project, and they were not far from shooting because it was going to be one of the first productions up during pandemic times. And they said, would you consider this? And at that time, nobody knew when the business was coming back. I mean, Tracy and I, we had one child, we hadn't been working, obviously. He's always wrestling with the idea that maybe his writing career's over, so we didn't know about that either. And so it was a pandemic job when we didn't know when the recovery would start. So that was also part of it. Also HBO, which had been, they gave me my first job ever, and I really liked working for HBO. And but Bertha's, she's the villain, but she wins, and she's driving the story. She's driving the story, and we know from the story of America that she does win. Actually, they all win, and for better or for worse, they really planted some seeds that we're really reaping what we sow now, aren't we? Late stage capitalism, and so it was just fun. And I had done period pieces before, but on stage, I'd never done them on camera. So that was an experience I had, but nobody knew. Nobody thought of me in that way. So
it's so interesting to hear you describe her as a villain because
Yeah.
I think especially at the start she feels that way,
Yeah.
and then once I got into season 2, it's because she's driving the action, and also because her ambition, her intelligence, her I'm going to say passionate marriage,
Yeah.
are all so appealing. Like there's stuff that people can really get excited
Yeah.
about while they're watching the show. It's almost like she's not an anti-hero. She just kind of shifts into this role where it's a lot easier to root for her. Like it's a lot
I
easier
know you're
to
like,
get
I'm rooting
behind.
for the capitalist
Right, which feels
robber
a
baron.
little weird, but also it never feels wrong to root for Carrie Coon. So
Thank you. Well, that's what I bring to the project. But I think, you're right. The marriage is really important. The way Julian chose to do that, I think, is such a savvy. It just shows his expertise in this area. And frankly, I have to say it's a little bit sad that respect is so sexy right now, but it is. And so, it's fun to play. It's fun to play that. And I do think they've done the work to, we have chances to see her vulnerability, and I think they gave her more of that. They keep giving her more opportunities to show when she's vulnerable, because she seems so invulnerable a lot of the time. And that's the cracks are what I'm most interested in.
this is kind of jumping ahead a little bit, but because it applies, or it's something I noticed when I was watching His Three Daughters. But also in The Gilded Age, I feel like those moments of vulnerability almost feel like they're outside of your control. Like you get to portray them in the moment. So you act them out and you put them in there. But then so many of them exist like at the beginning or the end of a scene. And because of His Three Daughters, the way it's edited, where like a lot of it kind of jumps all of a sudden.
Yeah.
I felt like a lot of that vulnerability came through in these little moments that like I didn't even know if you would be able to trust as an actor they would end up in there. So like I wanted to ask how you kind of approach that. Like do you think about, just what's on the page and trust that all of that's going to make it in? Do you just do the job where it's like, I'm here and I see it and I'm going to go through with it? Or like do you want to know, like I did this very specifically, like I gave her this humanity, I gave her this moment, it needs to be in there, like, or do you just have to give up the trust?
Yeah, I guess my job is the paint. I don't get to choose what they use. I've never thought I know a lot of actors who remember like takes. They're like, oh, but there was that one take where and I don't have any of that. I'm not cursed with that kind of memory. I don't have it. I don't have the capacity. Again, my children are 6 and 3. It's a miracle that I'm here right now. So I think in something like The Gilded Age, because I understand the way Bertha operates in that story, I'm always fighting for more vulnerability, and I'm always looking for it. But in a script like His Three Daughters, that was so specifically written. Those characters are really specific, and we did not change a word. There's no improv in that film. And the way it was shot was built into the script, so we knew, I knew it was going to start on that stark white wall, and he wasn't going to cut away to the other actors. So we knew he was doing it kind of experimentally. I understood that what you were experiencing was the way that sisters see each other, right? And then slowly, as their point of view gets complicated, so does the audience. That's very savvy. You don't see writing that's that formulaic and like thematically sound very often. It was very, very deft. They don't share a frame until the obituary scene. That is so specific. And it's working on you unconsciously. As a viewer, you're not necessarily paying attention to those things, but it is absolutely like set the way that thing is shot. It's not like, well, let's see what sticks, you know? It's very, very set. Okay. So, but Ozza did talk about capturing those little moments that you're talking about. He goes, oh, once I kind of let you guys loose in there were little things that I don't even think you were doing. And I think that's probably true. I mean, there is some part of it that's unconscious. You are letting yourself go inside of those circumstances, right? Here are the given circumstances. Here's the language I have. This is my prop, right? Here's my scene partner. And then the hope is that you do get to be out of control. I mean, that's the gift of it, is the invitation to not be holding on so tight. And I learned that, again, from being on stage. I remember I was doing a two-hander. I was doing Blackbird at Milwaukee Renaissance Theater Works. And my scene partner was a gentleman, Brian Monty, who I'd worked with at APT. And, you know, I was a good girl. It was a two-hander. I learned all my lines. I knew all my lines. I knew what was coming next. And I think he said something to the effect one night. We were in previews, and he was like, you know, you don't always have to know what comes next. You know, you can kind of let go of it and just know that it's going to be there, but you don't have to know. And that's so simple. But that night, I absolutely just did it. I absolutely did it. And it's like a switch flips. And he was like, and I was like, yeah, I know. I was like, that's it. He was like, that's it. And of course I'd had moments of that. I just didn't identify it as anything. Like I never named it. And as you pointed out with teaching, once you name something, then you have an opportunity to really, you know, explore the thing. So once that got named, then it's the thing you're chasing the whole rest of the way. And when you're working with people like Lizzie and Natasha, you know, Natasha who's at the height of her powers, Lizzie who's only 35, whose best work is ahead of her and everything she's done is extraordinary. They're just, like, it's so pleasurable to just put yourself in there and just get ready and see what's going to happen, you know? It's the most electric it can be when you're with people like that.
Yeah, and I imagine those, like that kind of trust that you have to have in not thinking about what comes next, not knowing what comes next, also just comes from experience.
Yeah.
Like you have to have done it so many times that you're not so worried about your next line or your next responsibility in the scene.
And making a mistake. Yeah. Like, it's just a film. Like, you get to do it again. You're just like, oops, sorry, guys. When I was doing the post with Steven Spielberg, right? You're working with Steven Spielberg. Again, could be really terrifying. There was the scene where I pick up the phone and I'm getting the judges, like reading back the judge's declaration to the room. I kept picking the phone up with the wrong hand. He's just like, no, your right hand and turn this way. And I just kept doing it wrong. The whole newsroom. And I did it wrong so many, many times. And again, that's a moment. That's a moment where you like start to have a nervous breakdown because you're fucking up in front of Steven Spielberg. Sure. And he's giving you this note and you're not taking the note. And if you make it about you, it's over. You're done. You're not going to get through it. And so you have to be like, sorry, I'm so sorry. I did it again. And you have to get really comfortable with making a mistake in front of all of those people. Again, it's always, always, always fear. It's always fear of some kind of humiliation. Who cares? You're just going to do it again. Like, you shouldn't care so much. And the thing as a young actor you have to learn is like, making a mistake is the only way you're going to get to the most interesting place you can be in. I think it was Vicky Krieps. Is it Krieps? Krebs? Yeah, German, you know?
I'm always mistaking him, yeah.
She was saying, I saw an interview with her a couple weeks ago. I just happened to catch a clip of it where she was like, when I approach a scene, I think, how wrong can I go? She goes like really far in like the worst possible, weirdest direction. And like that was really wrong. Which is such a great way to think about it. She goes, because that's what a scientist does. She's like, it's science. You're going to like do something, and you're going to like, all right, well, we're going to pull back this element and, you know, change the experiment. Like, think of it experimentally. It's so much more fun when you do that. When you let go of the fear and the self-consciousness and you recognize that, like, it kind of doesn't matter, that we're all going to die. I mean, the number of times I look around on a set and think, all of these people were babies, and now they're all here, and someday all of us will be gone. It's so moving every single time, because you're like, this moment, this will never happen again. So what are you thinking about? Like, what are you really worried about? Yourself? When it's like so much bigger than that? And I just find that so grounding. And the more you can throw that stuff out, now you're better at it on some days than others, you know? Again, I got 2 kids. Like, I got a lot of stuff I'm thinking about all the time. It's hard for me to be as prepared as I want to be for work now. I'm always like a little bit underprepared, and it's so hard as somebody who likes to do a good job to be underprepared. But you also have to accept that. You're like, well, this is as good as I am today. And so I got to rely on the people across from me.
There's only so much time in the day.
That's
There's
right.
only so much you can give to that time.
That's right. And you have to understand that they are going to give you what you need.
Yeah.
You don't have to bring all of it yourself. If you do, then, well, that's no fun.
I do have to imagine it was a little bit strange, though, to look around the set of The Post specifically and have those thoughts where Tom Hanks is right there,
Yeah.
and Meryl Streep is right there, and Steven Spielberg is right there, and then your husband is also right there, too.
Yeah, it's pretty weird. That was pretty weird.
All right, well, I want to stick with His Three Daughters for just a couple
Okay.
more minutes, then I'm going to get into your audience questions because you guys wrote some good ones.
Ooh, we'll see.
We will judge them, of course, but
Yeah, we're best question award.
we'll decide if we tell you which is the worst question. With His Three Daughters, one of the things I saw in the press notes was that, like, you described Katie as being somebody who was like controlling and bossy. Like, she's definitely somebody who is very invested in you know, like the moment and getting things done and accomplishing tasks. And you said at the time that you don't see yourself that way, but you think your siblings see you that way.
No, I absolutely am that way.
Okay.
With them.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I wanted to know, like, is that something that you can actually, like, see in yourself, or if you need someone to point it out to?
Oh, no.
Like,
No,
is
I'm
it something that
completely
comes
objective about myself.
Like, have you always known that? Have you always been able to see kind of how you're seen by other people? Is that something that's important as an actor to recognize those things because, you know, that's part of the job?
What's interesting? Again, I'm a middle child. When you're in the middle like that, you're always reading the room. You always are taking the temperature. My husband would say you're only as happy as the unhappiest person in any room because you're aware of somebody not being comfortable. And just having a lot of siblings. I mean, I have 4 siblings and big family. And so, you know, you're always aware, like, and you're looking for safety sometimes. Like, I didn't come from like a terribly onerous childhood or anything, but like we had our stuff, you know? And there are certain sensitivities. And I do think that I'm an Aquarius. And I was class president, you know? But I was class president because I kind of got along with everybody. I knew how to get along with everybody. But I didn't necessarily have like a lot of close friends, you know? So it's like there's something lonely about it in a way. But I was shape-shifting. I was shape-shifting, and I think you do learn a lot from that. It's good to dispense with it when it becomes an aberrant behavior, though. You shouldn't keep doing that. You should learn to be an integrated person, which, you know, that's the work of the life, I think.
Well, speaking of kind of that integration, one of the things, like you noted with His Three Daughters, that it's very specific. Like the script is very specific, and obviously the director has a vision in mind that he's following. But there is a very specific vibe that the sisters have that you recognize as a sisterly relationship, like as a familial relationship. How do you go about creating that? Like, is it studying the script? Is it listening to the director? Is it also trying to communicate with your cast members about, like, you know, this is how I think, you know, we would move, we would touch, we would not touch,
You know,
we would, like...
it happens more organically than that. Okay. Tracy would say if he were here, he's like, it's not fairy dust, that's the job. You know, vulnerability and intimacy is actually the job. And then you know, I guess people execute that job with various degrees of safety. I would say I am now better at doing it with boundaries than I was when I was a young person. So that's good, that's healthy, you know? But like when Lizzie and Natasha and I read that script and we all put our hands up for it, you know exactly what the job is. It's that you have 17 days to shoot. And every single minute of those 17 days will count or you won't finish your job. And we had, I think, 2 days of rehearsal. So just by virtue of everyone, I think we all showed up knowing that was the responsibility of that job. And loving Ozza. I mean, I said it felt like we were making a home movie for Ozza, that he had some stuff to work out, without the expectation that anyone would ever see it. You know, it was kind of like, maybe nobody will ever see this. But it was so so satisfying. So everybody was really willing to be vulnerable, and that's why you have those performances. I think specifically Natasha's performance, Natasha would be the first person to admit if she was sitting here how much she's performing self in public. She's a comedian. But when she feels safe, then you get that sort of really beautiful vulnerability in that film, and that's because she came in and was willing to do that. And that's what it's about.
I was really impressed with a lot of those shots were like in profile, and you still got so much from her in that reveal, which I just
beautiful. It's a beautiful performance.
Okay, last thing before I get to the audience questions. As an actor working with other actors, do you ask a lot of questions? Like not necessarily about the work itself, but like if you admire an actor or if you just see an actor doing something that resonates with you, or you're curious about, or you don't understand.
Yeah.
Like you mentioned, as like coming from a school, you can recognize certain teachings and certain backgrounds in people. But if you don't recognize those things, like, do you want to have those conversations? Like, what do you talk? Do you talk about acting with other actors?
You do. I do want to have those conversations, but I also recognize when it's appropriate to have those conversations.
Sure. Yeah.
And so sometimes the opportunity doesn't necessarily present itself. And you learn a lot just by being there with them. Like you learn a lot by doing the thing with them. I've been scared to act 2 times. The first time was with David Thewlis, because naked, he's just extraordinary, and I was terrified of him. And I'll say I was probably not very impressive. He was word perfect on every single take, and I was really nervous. I was nervous. And I don't get nervous. Tracy would tell you, I don't really get that nervous.
Was this the finale of Fargo?
Yes, the finale of Fargo. And it was like our last day. We shot it on our
yeah.
last day. I was really intimidated by David, and I never felt like I was great in that scene with him because I got in my own way a little bit. And then the other time, but I loved watching him. I just loved watching. He was very alive. And the other time was doing Strange Weather, a small indie film I did with Holly Hunter, who is the epitome of kill, fuck, or fly. You have no idea what she's going to do. She takes it very seriously, but she does not take herself too seriously. But she takes the work. The work is absolutely sacred. And she's very playful. But there are moments where you're like, oh no, she's going to kill me. And it is, absolutely electrifying. And I had to do an 8-page scene with her in a hotel room, and I was so scared that she would think I was bad. I didn't want Holly Hunter to think I was bad. I wanted her to think that I was equal to her. And so every time I messed up, I was just like, oh no. So that was a time where I really had a hard time. But so I think I just try to, more than anything, stay open to the experience. The questions I do ask, though, I'm working on The Gilded Age with Christine Baranski, Cynthia Nixon, Audra McDonald, and I'm absolutely like, should I take my kids to Thailand? So it's the stuff about trying to figure out how to have a career that's extraordinary as the ones they've had while having a family and a husband who has his own career. Trying to figure out how to do any of it at all well is kind of the real trick. You can get a job, but can you learn your lines in time, It's just like the practical living of trying to have a career and be an artist and also do all the other things is where I really am leaning on the women in my life right now.
So wait, what did Christine say about the kids in Thailand? Did she tell you to bring them?
She said leave them at home.
Leave them at home. Yeah.
And Audra said bring them.
Oh boy. Then you got to pick. That's
they
putting
just
you in
had
an
very different
awkward
experiences.
Situation.
And
yeah.
you know what was the difference maker? Climate change. Because it was 115 degrees. The UV index was 14. And my child, he's translucent, so he stayed home. Yeah. And my husband's allergic to the sun and hates the ocean. So I commuted.
All those traits. Yeah.
I just commuted on the longest flight in the world, like you do.
As a parent, you take that responsibility on
right.
yourself.
That's my job.
As opposed to giving it to them. Okay, so first question from the audience. This one comes from Christine. First and foremost, she says, I adore everything about The Gilded Age. The period, the history, I think this says production design, sorry. Costumes, acting style. But the script pulls me out. I think that's a positive. Is it challenging for all you thespians working on these scripts?
The thing about The Gilded Age that's so hard, and we've had some new actors joining us this season, what they start to understand when they open their mouths on set for the first time is the line of it is actually really narrow. So you will feel when it's really, really too big. And you'll also feel when it's too small to inhabit the dress or the room that you're in. And the channel is actually pretty specific. And I'm not sure we always nail it. I always say we'd win a lot of awards if you turn off the sound. I shouldn't say those things, but it's the truth. That's how I feel about myself. I always make fun of myself as Bertha because I just think I'm so absurd sometimes. Because it really is like just a very fine line to walk. And I think that's the thing people learn when they come in because it's quite heightened. You're doing the dialect thing. And you're all trying to be on the same page with that. And you sometimes have been away because it's an ensemble show. Like when they go to Bransky's house, I could be off for 4 weeks. Right. So you come back and suddenly you're like, I don't know how to talk. I don't know how to do this. Right. Where is my voice? And so it's so like specific, that channel. And you can really, when you step out of it, you're like, oh no, I gotta rein it back in. And sometimes we'll just do these takes where you're like, that was like 15 beats of reaction to seeing, Enid Winterton. That'll never see the light of day. And inevitably, you're right, it was too big. But like, it's very specific work, actually. And so the challenge is just making sure you're in that channel. And, we're there with varying degrees of success on any given day.
Well, luckily you didn't have to do any sort of weird commutes to another show and take long breaks to get
Yeah, sure, just all preparation for me.
Kept it easy on yourself.
Oh my goodness.
Okay, the next question is from Taylor. In the beginning of your career, when you were having a hard day or an off day, or opportunities were scarce, what would you tell yourself to motivate you to keep going?
Oh, when opportunities were scarce. I would sometimes fantasize about what I would do instead, but I never did it. I have to say, this maybe seems kind of cheesy, but one of the things that always would return me back to just staying grounded was I would read. I would go back to things like Portrait of a Lady. Really just luscious language would help me. And here's a really controversial thing to say. You know that time that actors talk about where they're like, and for 2 years I didn't have a job? That's never happened to me. And I don't know why, but it's been really like one foot in front of the other. And I think the one time I hadn't had a job, I think it'd been like a month and I didn't know what was next. And Tracy was just like, it's just calm down. It's going to be fine. I was like, oh, I do have that thing. I have the thing. I think I'm never going to work again. I didn't think I had that thing, but I have it. And then this play was out. And I was like, yes. I just immediately said yes to the play. That was the first time I came up against that engine where I was like, oh no. And also now all my skills have atrophied and I have no marketable skills now. I actually can't do anything anymore. So that was the first time I really felt that fear. So I think the thing I always say to myself is, we're all going to die.
We're all
going to die, and so so what am I going to do just right now, in this moment? Or the present moment is always okay.
I cannot think of a better moment to end it on than that. We've eclipsed our
That was all our audience questions. I talked too much.
I'm sorry, I talked too much. I asked too many, but the questions were great. I will share them with you later if you like. But thank you all for being here.
Yeah,
thank you
guys
so much
for coming. Thank you for listening to me.
Yeah, great.
I appreciate it. Thanks, Ben.
Thank you.